Win big with new DRF All Access past performances. With one best-in-class product, you now get all 3 past performance formats. Go to DRF.com and use coupon code 1FREEPP for a free single card today.
Dan Illman, Ashley Mailloux taking a look at race number 6 at Woodbine on Woodbine Mile Saturday. Of course, the mile is the main event, but you could make the argument that this race, the Grade 3 Ontario Matron, is the best betting race on the entire program. Let's throw up the field of fillies and mares going 1 mile and a 16th on the Tapeta. It's the kickoff leg of a 20-cent, $250,000 guaranteed pick 5, and it's as overflow a field as you're going to see. We've got what? 15 entered in here, several also eligibles, and you can make a case for 6 or 7.
You stole my thunder. You do this all the time. This is the best betting race on the card. I completely agree with your statement there. And kind of looking at the fillies and mares in here, there's horses that I think maybe you make an excuse for their last out effort, but you go 2 or 3 starts back. And I think there are a lot of horses that you have, a case to be made for in here. And I think looking at the morning line, there's a lot of horses that are in that, 10 to 15 to 1 range, Dan, that I think at least underneath are extremely intriguing.
And there should be some pace in this big field as well. And we throw up our Timeform US pace projector. The one Liban is going to be racing on synthetic for the first time, but has to take advantage of this inside post if she handles the surface at all leaving the gate. She just outdraws the other speed on Timeform US's projector, the 13 Road Town. I expect them both to be close. Sand and Sea, the 7. Also has tactical speed. And I think the fact that she sat last time out is a really good sign for her.
I also think the 14 Metaphysical at that outside draw, we see this horse pretty close here with the Timeform pace projections, has been pretty close in those races 2 and 3 back. Last time out, she had issues at the break and maybe will be sharper now, second off that freshening. But I am very curious to see how fast this pace will be. I don't think it'll be, blistering, but I do think we'll see fractions that are quicker than we would normally see for 1 mile and a 16th.
And if it is fast, it could really help the 11. Forever Dixie, who has the fastest Timeform US late pace rating and is getting back arguably to her preferred surface with a much better setup than last time. Let's start things off with the Sappy Joseph trained runner. The number 1 Liban, we'll see how she does. Switching to synthetic for the first time, just in tough last time out in the Beverly D. She was facing some really good fillies and mares on the turf, and she came up wanting at a distance that might have been a little too steep.
And I think the race 2 back at Lone Star and the Wasted Tears, they had a lot of confidence, right? She won with ease. She looked good doing so. So they gave her the shot on the Beverly D, and why not? It's when you're in for the Breeders' Cup, and maybe you get lucky. Not so lucky. She was last in that field. But you talked about the depth of that race. Moira, Favrover, both just really nice mares. And I'm curious to see what will happen now. I don't really think she'll have a tough time really adjusting to the surface, and Edgar Zaya is going to stick with her here. And she has the tactical early foot, and we saw that in her 2 starts at Lone Star. It really plays well to her advantage.
I think the number 2 Elysian Field is very dangerous in this race at a price, moving back to a synthetic service. And we saw what she can do on synthetic last year, winning the Woodbine Oaks, finishing second in the King's Plate. She's good on turf, no doubt about it. She just missed in the Breeders' Stakes in an excellent effort last year. But I think at this point in her career, she's better on the synth. She's well drawn with tactical speed.
I think going into the Canadian, I might have been the opposite thinking, right? Thinking that she might have been better on the turf, and then seeing that performance, and then also looking at her performance at the Belmont at Aqueduct meet in that allowance optional claiming event. I do agree with you. I think now I can probably say, yes, she prefers the synthetic, but she had a very tough campaign last year. I don't think we can forget that. Not only did she participate in the Oaks, but we saw her in the plate. We saw her with that game, second place finish behind Touch and Ride in the Breeders' Stakes. And maybe it's just taken her a little bit more to get going. And you talked about it. Maybe the surface has played a role in that as well. I thought the effort 2 back going 1 mile and an 1/8, she looked very good.
Switching to Tapeta really helped the 3 Rosie's Alibi. This horse always had a little bit of buzz around her when she started her career for Todd Pletcher. It didn't work out for Todd. Switched to Michael Trombetta. They gave her a sprint prep. She scored on turf, but then last time out in the Princess of Sylmar over the Tapeta at Presque Isle Downs, I thought she was very professional. She saved ground in the pocket, squeezed through along the inside. Yes, it was a good trip, but I think she's slowly starting to validate the promise they've had for her since the beginning of her career.
I think so too. And I think using that sprint race as her first start for the barn was just maybe a feeler, and she still raced very well. But to see her last 2 and to see her take that improvement in terms of figures. Her tactical early foot has stayed true, right? And that's what you would hope coming out of that sprint race where she was close enough to it. I wonder from a trip perspective if she's sort of in that sweet spot early on where she lets the speed go. Maybe she's tracking in fourth or fifth, couple of lengths off the pace. And we've shown that she can really close nicely. She's able to do it very well in those last two. And, this is a good spot for her, I think, to now kind of step it up again and try graded stakes competition. I think she's been handled very well by the barn.
Synthetic debut for the 4 Affirmative Lady, who certainly has plenty of back class. She won the Gulfstream Park Oaks in 2023. The problem is how to discern her current form. Her most recent race was her first start off an extremely long layoff, and she just didn't pick her feet up at all at Laurel in a very disappointing performance.
Really disappointing. The only thing that I can maybe defend out of that race is it was very much a merry-go-round race.
Yes.
There was not much passing. There was not much change in that race in terms of Mailloux. Beauty was towards the front and, ends up winning by 2 3/4 lengths. The other thing too with that, I think the times really solidify that as well, right? 25 to the opening quarter, 49 to the half. Even at that level of stakes competition, right? It's not a graded stake. You would have thought that they would have gone faster. So, and not only does she have that sort of question mark about last time out, I can make a case against it. I just still think second off a long layoff, trying a new surface. There's a lot to maybe, take caution here with. But again, if you do like her and you say, hey, this is the Gulfstream Park Oaks winner from, a year ago, then maybe she's the horse for you. And I think she's going to be a huge price in this field.
And the number 5, Blueberry Fields, will be making her stakes debut on Saturday, and she certainly deserves the opportunity. She's won 2 of her last 3, including this effort, a second-level allowance race over course and distance last month. Blueberry Fields looked pretty strong in the stretch of this race, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm still a little bitter watching this replay. I originally liked her and I switched to another horse in here, I think Literate, who ends up being the runner-up. And I thought this was a really game effort for her. You can't miss her. She's in between horses here. I thought she kind of had to, be pushed into that spot a little bit to split the 6 and the 7. I don't think she necessarily originally wanted to, but when Justin Stein asked her to, she was able to go through that gap. And I thought she went very nicely. And sure, she's going to get tested for class. And maybe her figures are slightly softer than others in here. But the big thing that she has for a 6-year-old mare, she's lightly raced, but she's extremely consistent.
The Baducata, the 6, put it all together over Gulfstream's Tapeta 2 starts back. Just a blowout win from the back of the pack, although I think it might have been a pace-aided win. They went very fast that day, and she swept by everyone. Do you think she was exposed a little bit last time out in the Grade 3 Trillium?
Yeah, I think there was an issue last time out, right? She really was chasing the pace. She was closer to it. The pace really wasn't that quick, but she sort of just gave up and ended up finishing second from last in that field. And we watched this performance. She looked great in the powder break, but you talked about it. Mile and 70 yards on the Tapeta. They went 23 to the opening quarter, 45 and 4 to the half is blistering. We can see horses at Gulfstream set really easy fractions and kind of walk the dog in the front end. But when you set fractions like that, the speed's really going to kind of stop in the stretch. And that's exactly what we saw. But I find it interesting to see Safi giving her another shot in Canada. He does have that small string up there, but you can see after this race, she went back to Saratoga to train, and they probably were trying to regroup and figure out where to go. And another thing that's interesting when you look at her, we talk about riders, Umberto Rispoli and all these jocks are coming into town for Woodbine Mile Day, and he's booked to ride.
Sand Sea, the number 7's just a cool horse. She's won on all 3 surfaces, and I like how Riley Mott's conditioned her this year. The first start was too short. The second one was too long. Now it's been just right in her last 2 races. A gate-to-wire win on the Tapeta, and a very likable score that she was able to settle last time out on the turf against fellow Indiana breds. This is a bit of a class test, but she's very honest.
She's very honest, and I think the thing that sticks out, like compared to anyone else in here the most, is her synthetic races. When you look at a horse as a whole, I mean, she is very consistent, a 4-time winner from 5 starts, and her lone defeat was at Gulfstream Park, where I think kind of looking at those races and those overnight handicaps, they can be tough. That one that she was defeated in was right around Pegasus, and $100,000. Everyone's coming to town. They'll bring whatever they have for that sort of race. So I think she is very dangerous in a spot like this in terms of the price horses. She was one that really caught my eye just because she has that early foot. I know it may look a little bit like she needs the lead to win, but that's not the case. Go back to some of those races at Ellis Park last year. She's comfortable rating. She was comfortable rating at Horseshoe Indy as well. So I really like her. I don't think she would need to take a huge step forward to win a race like this.
Fashionably Fab is just an obvious contender in this race, returning to synthetic. She was in a little tough on turf last time out in the Canadian, but her race 2 starts back in the Trillium makes her a really strong factor. Let's watch that effort. She finished 3rd that day, and I thought she ran just fine, getting beaten a neck with a 90 Beyer speed figure. She's a multiple stakes winner over course and distance, and she's another horse that's very tactical.
Very tactical. And I feel like in her last, I don't know, 3 starts, she's just been a touch, further back early on. And it hasn't worked really against her. I think in a race like this, especially where we think the pace might be hot, I think it really is going to help her, where she doesn't have to be necessarily the first, horse or two chasing the pace, where she's happy and comfortable, maybe 3-4 lengths off the pace. So I really like her. I'm not going to hold the Canadian against her last time out, just knowing it's her second time on the turf. Yes, she's been able to run on anything and has wins on all 3 surfaces, but I think she's another major player in here. And Kazushi Kimura is going to, be aboard her for the first time out. Not a bad thing as well.
As solid as that effort was, you could even argue her win in the Bell Mahone off the layoff was even better. 92 Beyer speed figure, good tactical speed and very game. We just saw Solo Album get the better of Fashionably Fab in the Trillium, and that was a strong performance because she had to face pressure every step of the way and she just refused to lose. And in the Bell Mahone, it took Fashionably Fab just about the entire stretch to run her down. So she's obviously in great form right now for Mark Casse. She's another horse that can sit from just off of the pace, but I wonder if she is more effective when she gets to the front. And there are some fast horses in this race that you'll have to deal with.
Yeah, I start to wonder the same thing, if she may just be more effective on the lead. And I still don't want to stamp her as a need the lead type. But when you look at her recent, I want to say closing efforts, we're talking about 1.25 miles in the grade 3 Maple Leaf. It's just different. It's a different distance. We're not talking about 1.16 trip. So her last 2, she's been right there, obviously a major player in this spot once again. And I agree with you. I think the last year, safe to say, she's been in her best form. Her one dull effort was at Gulfstream Park, and it was in between. We saw her on the shelf for a little bit, and then after that race, we also saw her back on the shelf.
The number 10 is Sabatini, and on the one hand, she's a lightly raced 3-year-old filly taking on some battle-hardened and battle-tested older fillies and mares. But on the other hand, she's got all the upside in the world and obviously has some ability. I'm just going to draw a line through the last race. I have a feeling she's not a turf horse. 2 back in the Celine over this distance. She was a very professional winner.
You're talking about the horses that she faced up there too, Whit Waters and, right? I mean, just nice horses that were up for Sovereign Awards. So there's nothing wrong with her. I think she's gotten better as distance has been added. She was fine at 7/8, but I think she really appreciated the 2 turns. We've only seen her 2 turns once in her career. So yeah, she has to face older here, maybe has some things to question a little bit, but I thought she looked very good in the grade 3 Celine. I agree with you. The Ontario Colleen, I don't think she handled the surface nearly as well. She got a very similar trip where Sophia Vivas said, you know what, we're going to stalk. And when called upon, she had nothing. And maybe, again, it had to do with the turf, 1 turn distance. But we can't forget the second place finish there, Simply in Front, did some magical things at Kentucky Downs in a $2 million race to win. So she's a horse, another one in here. I wouldn't let her age or her limited resume, kind of suggest that she needs to be tossed out from a betting perspective. I think she's a player.
Forever Dixie, the number 11, again, might benefit from a fast pace. She does have a strong kick, and she looked good in the Trillium, the replay we showed before with Fashionably Fab, because she kind of had to steady onto a wrong lead when altering course in between horses, didn't have the cleanest trip and was finishing with a plum. Last time out in the Canadian on turf, maybe that was just a little bit too tough for her. But if you give her a fast pace and a clean trip, she can come with an honest kick.
She's tough for me in here. We saw that she does have the LP flag attached to her, and she's going to be closing, and she should get the setup. It's just like, is that going to be enough to get her in the winner's circle? I feel like she's gotten those trips down, and not to be hard on her, because it wouldn't surprise me if she says, is it second or third in this race? But she's facing Solo Album, who typically gets the better of her. Fashionably Fab, it's been hit or miss, right? When we look at the past performances. I just hope, in terms of her trip, that Patrick Husbands doesn't have her too far off of it. It's a big field. You can run into some traffic, and she might not get the smoothest of trips.
Ontario bred Tito's Calling looks like she's going to really have to improve in here. They ran her in the Trillium. It didn't work out. 3 starts back. 2 subsequent turf efforts just don't excite. She's going to be a big price. I won't talk anyone off who likes her. She's just going to have to improve.
I just think at this point we saw more from her as a 3-year-old than a 4-year-old. Sometimes that happens with fillies where they kind of, reach their peak maybe. And she was in great form when you look at kind of after the Woodbine Oaks. She went to the Bison City. She went to the Wonderwear. She was right there with all of those. And, her lone win this year was just against softer competition. She did beat Wickenheiser. It was a nice filly as well, but I just haven't been enamored with her last several.
I think Rotown had an excuse for her most recent race. She didn't break well at all, and then she sort of rushed up and pulled hard into the pocket. She saved ground after that with a pretty good trip, but only to be beaten a length and a half after that bad break. I think it shows that this filly has ability, and she can be a lot more forwardly placed if she does break better.
She can. And another one that in terms of experience maybe doesn't have the test class, testing for class at this point in her career. She got it last time out, but it was her first start in the barn of Kevin Attard. She had a couple of months off. You talked about the trip. I thought it was a rough trip as well. So she has upside. And when you look at the horses that she faced, I know she wasn't in stakes competition, but she faced some really nice horses down the page wherever she went, well-traveled in her career. So the one promising thing I said, a couple of things. I shouldn't say just one, but another start in the barn, another start off the layoff, and her last figure is her best to this point in her career.
Perhaps Metaphysical is a closer that you could use, at least on the bottom of your single race exotics, if you think this pace is going to be hot, stretching out to 1.16 miles. Just couldn't get as forwardly placed as they wanted last time out after sort of being awkward from the starting gate. But she did pass some horses in the stretch. It was her first race off of a short layoff. Post 14, that's not easy at all. So she's going to have to work out a bit of a trip.
Yeah, and I'm going to be very curious as to where she is. You talked about her maybe closing. I see a situation where she is closer to it, looking at the races 2 and 3 back. And post 14 is the big issue here, right? What do you do? And it's going to be interesting to see what her trainer and rider decide to do, because I do think she has enough early foot where she can probably get into a good position. But going down the page, a lot of her races 7/8 a mile. She's really going to need to have something left here, especially at the 1.16 distance.
And if the also eligible Ephrata draws into this race, it would be a real tough ask. Outside post, 10-month layoff. So let's take a look at our top selections. Again, this is a great betting race. It kicks off the 20-cent $250,000 guaranteed pick 5. And Fashionably Fab's a horse I want to use in the pick 5 because she's just so consistent.
She's extremely consistent. I just wonder if she gets the right trip here. We talked about it. She can sit a couple of lengths off the pace. She doesn't need to be the horses that are directly chasing the pace setters. And I just think if the pace is good enough here, she's one to use. But, looking at our picks here, we have some of the same horses, Dan. We're kind of all over the place. I think it speaks to this race. I think if I'm playing any sort of, trifecta in here, I'm using a lot more than 4 horses. I will have to kind of have, more coverage in that 3rd spot.
I'm hoping for a little bit of a price on Rosie's Alibi. Has just been in razor sharp form recently and seems to have found herself on the synthetic. She's going to have to take her game to another level as she steps up in class. And I just have a feeling that Sappy Joseph, who pretty much could do no wrong in 2024, has Liban ready to go with a speed tried from the rail. I think she's going to handle this surface. 8, 9, 7, 10 for Ashley. 3, 1, 9, 8 for me. Great racing at Woodbine on Saturday. Best of luck.